The cold light of the streetlights flashed on the wet asphalt of Hamden. Gray raindrops drummed on the windshield of the police car, creating a monotonous rhythm interrupted only by the sharp bursts of the police radio. Detective Hayden Frost, gripping the steering wheel tightly, peered into the early morning darkness. The call came in at 3:15 a.m., a murder at the Harbor Plaza Business Center, where the Blackwell and Partners law firm had held a corporate party the night before. The glass building of the business center glinted in the darkness with the blue and red flashes of police cars. Frost, a tall man with piercing eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, got out of the car, throwing a raincoat over his shoulders. He was met by a young officer, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Detective Frost? There's a body on the 12th floor in the main conference room. It was first discovered by a security guard during his rounds," the officer reported, leading the detective to the elevators. "Have you identified the body?" Frost asked, entering the elevator and pressing the button for the 12th floor. "Yes, sir. It's Isaac Blackwell, owner of a law firm that occupies 3 floors of this building. 40 years old, successful lawyer, specializing in corporate law." The elevator doors slid open, revealing a spacious lobby with subdued lighting. Police tape blocked the corridor leading to the conference room. Behind it, forensic experts were busy at work. Camera flashes, the methodical movements of experts in white overalls, hushed conversations. "What do we have?" Frost asked the forensic expert leaning over the body. Isaac Blackwell lay on his back with his arms outstretched. The snow-white shirt under his elegant jacket was soaked with blood, forming a dark pool beneath the body. Tall and athletic, even in death, he retained an expression of arrogance on his sharply featured face. "One gunshot wound to the chest," replied the expert, without looking up from his work. "The bullet went through the heart. Death was almost instantaneous. Preliminary time of death is between 1:30 and 2:30 a.m. I'll be more precise after the autopsy." Frost looked around. The conference room was a large space with panoramic windows and a long oval table in the middle. The remnants of the celebration, empty glasses, half-eaten snacks, overturned chairs, were evidence of recent revelry, contrasting sharply with the current scene. "The murder weapon?" asked the detective, putting on latex gloves. "Here," said one of the forensic scientists, pointing to a gun in a clear evidence bag. "A Glock 19, found under the table, about 2 meters from the body. We've already checked. It's registered to the victim." Frost studied the gun carefully through the transparent plastic. "Fingerprints?" "Preliminary analysis showed the victim's fingerprints and those of another person. We've already started identification." At that moment, a woman in her 30s, dressed as an officer, entered the conference room. "Detective Frost, we've reviewed the surveillance footage. The corporate event officially ended around 1 a.m. Most of the guests left the building by 1:15, but a few people lingered. The last person to leave with the victim was a woman named Savannah Wright, his secretary. The cameras recorded her running out of the building in tears at around 11:30 p.m., but then returning about 30 minutes later. She left the building again at 2:10 a.m., looking agitated. Frost nodded, making notes in his notebook. "Any witnesses? Who else was in the building?" "The security guard at the reception desk, but he was on the first floor. According to him, he didn't notice anyone else after the party ended. We've collected the contact information of all the employees who attended the party. Several have already been brought in for questioning and are waiting in the break room on the 10th floor." Frost examined the crime scene once more, lingering on the details. An overturned chair next to the body, a broken glass, drops of whiskey on the polished surface of the table. "All right, I'll go talk to the witnesses," he said, heading for the exit. "Keep up the good work and keep me posted." In the lounge on the 10th floor, Frost found 3 people, 2 men and a woman. They were sitting on the sofas, looking exhausted and shaken. The detective introduced himself and began questioning the woman who seemed the most composed. "Taylor Pierce, lawyer. I've been with Blackwell and Partners for 3 years, she said, handing him her business card. The woman was dressed in an elegant black dress, now slightly rumpled, with a pearl necklace around her neck. "I can't believe this happened." "Tell me what happened at the party," Frost asked, turning on his tape recorder. Taylor took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "It was the annual party to celebrate the founding of the firm. Everything started out well: dinner, congratulations, employee awards. But around 11 o'clock, Isaac got very drunk and started. She faltered, searching for the right words, behaving horribly towards Savannah. Savannah Wright, his secretary? Yes. You see, Savannah is a trans woman. She started working for us 2 years ago, before she transitioned. Isaac valued her as a professional, but when she began to openly express her identity about a year ago, his attitude changed. He became violent. Frost made a note in his notebook. What exactly happened yesterday? Before the corporate party, we lost an important client, a conservative insurance company. They openly stated that they were leaving because of a values conflict, referring to Savannah. Isaac was furious. At the party, when everyone had relaxed, he publicly humiliated her, called her the wrong pronoun, said she was ruining the firm's reputation by existing, that her— Taylor faltered again. That her attempt to be a woman was ridiculous and pathetic. It was awful. Many employees tried to stop him, but he was too drunk and angry. How did Savannah react? She tried to remain professional, but it was too much. In the end, she burst into tears and ran out of the room. I tried to catch up with her, but she had already left in a taxi. Frost nodded, making another note. Did anyone see her come back? No, I left around midnight. But one of the junior partners, Ellis Ramsey, said he saw her when he was leaving the building at about 1:15. She looked determined, and he thought she might have come back to get her things or talk to Isaac. After questioning the other witnesses, Frost received similar statements. No one doubted Blackwell's cruelty towards Savannah, but no one could have imagined that the conflict would end so tragically. By the time the detective returned to the conference room, the forensic team had finished their preliminary examination of the crime scene. Any results on the fingerprints? He asked the team leader. Yes, and you won't be surprised. The second set of fingerprints on the gun belonged to Savannah Wright, the victim's secretary. We also found her prints on the overturned chair, the glass, and the door handle. What about the cameras inside the conference room? They're disabled. According to the security guard, Blackwell personally ordered them to be turned off during the party so the employees could relax. It's standard practice for their events. Frost frowned as he analyzed the information. Savannah Wright's address? East 123rd Street, number 17, apartment 5, replied one of the officers, handing him a sheet of paper. Okay, I'm on my way. Keep working here. Dawn was just beginning to paint the Hamden sky pale pink when Detective Frost parked near a small apartment building on East 123rd. The building looked well kept, but modest, a far cry from the luxurious apartments a successful lawyer could afford. Climbing to the second floor, Frost rang the doorbell of apartment number 5. There was no answer for a long time. Then he heard quiet footsteps, and the door slowly opened. Standing before him was a young woman with tear-stained eyes. Her dark skin looked painfully pale, and her long braids were carelessly gathered into a bun. She was wearing a wrinkled housecoat, under which she was wearing the same clothes she had worn in the surveillance footage, a severe blouse and pencil skirt. Savannah Wright, Detective Hayden Frost, Hamden Police, he introduced himself, showing his badge. I need to ask you a few questions about last night. Savannah stared at him, her eyes wide with fear. Her hands were shaking noticeably. I know why you're here, she whispered. Isaac is dead, isn't he? Frost studied her reaction closely. May I come in? She stepped back silently, letting him into the apartment. It was clean and tidy, but noticeably modest. Bookshelves filled with legal books, a small sofa, a coffee table with a laptop and framed photographs. When was the last time you saw Mr. Blackwell? Savannah sank onto the sofa, clasping her hands together. At the company party. He said some terrible things. I left around 11:30. Security cameras recorded you returning to the building at around 12 o'clock, said Frost, watching her reaction. Savannah covered her face with her hands. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to talk to him, to explain, to tell him I quit. What happened when you got back, Savannah? She looked up at him, her eyes filled with despair. I didn't kill him. Please, you have to believe me. Frost noticed a dark stain on the sleeve of her blouse peeking out from under her robe. "What's that on your clothes, Savannah?" She looked down and froze, only now noticing the stain. I don't know. I was so upset that I didn't even change when I got home." The detective stepped closer. "I need you to come with me to the station to give a statement. Your fingerprints were found on the murder weapon. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney." The words of the standard Miranda warning echoed in the small apartment as Savannah stared blankly ahead, seemingly unaware of what was happening. "Can I at least change my clothes?" she asked quietly when Frost finished. "I'll call a female officer to be present. Your clothes will be taken as evidence." While they waited for the officer to arrive, Frost noticed a photograph on the table. Savannah and a man who looked like Blackwell, smiling in front of an office building. They looked happy and friendly. "When was this taken?" he asked, pointing to the photo. Savannah smiled sadly. 2 years ago on the day he hired me. Isaac was different then. He was my mentor. He believed in me. Everything changed when I started transitioning. He couldn't accept it, said I had betrayed his trust. There was genuine pain in her voice, and for a moment Frost felt sympathy for her. But his professional experience quickly took over. He had seen too many criminals who were masters at playing on people's emotions. When the female officer arrived, Savannah changed into clean clothes under her supervision. Her work uniform was carefully packed into an evidence bag. Frost noticed that the stain on the sleeve looked very much like blood. As he led Savannah to the police car, he felt the stares of neighbors peering out of their windows in the early morning. The news of Blackwell's death had not yet spread, but the arrest of a young woman was bound to arouse curiosity. As he put Savannah in the back seat, Frost caught her eye. It wasn't so much fear as a deep, hopeless exhaustion. He'd seen that look in people whose lives were falling apart before their eyes, and they were powerless to do anything about it. Closing the car door, the detective knew that the case would be difficult. The evidence pointed to Savannah, but something in her behavior, in her relationship with Blackwell, suggested that there was much more to the story than met the eye. The lab would later confirm what he already suspected. The stain on the sleeve was indeed Isaac Blackwell's blood, and traces of gunpowder were found on Savannah's clothes. The evidence was coming together. The main question remained: what exactly happened in the conference room after she returned, and what made the young woman pick up the gun? The interrogation room at the Hamden police station was typical. Gray walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 uncomfortable chairs, and a large mirror that everyone knew led to a surveillance room. Savannah Wright sat hunched over in an orange prison jumpsuit that seemed too big for her fragile frame. Dark circles under her eyes and eyelids, swollen from crying, were evidence of a sleepless night. Detective Hayden Frost entered the room with a folder of documents and a cup of coffee, which he placed in front of Savannah. She did not touch the drink, continuing to stare at a spot on the table. "How are you feeling, Savannah?" Frost asked, taking a seat across from her. His voice sounded professional but not cold. "Like a person who has lost everything," she replied quietly, without looking up. Frost opened the folder and turned on the tape recorder, reciting the standard information: the date, time, names of those present, and the case number. "You refused to call a lawyer. Are you sure about that?" Savannah finally looked up. "I don't need a lawyer because I didn't kill Isaac. I admit I was there, that we were arguing, but I didn't shoot him." Frost studied her face, trying to determine if she was lying or telling the truth. Over the years, he had learned to read people, but Savannah was a challenge. Her expression was a mixture of fear, despair, and a deep, almost submissive sadness. "Tell me what happened after you returned to the office," he requested, making notes in his notebook. Savannah took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength. "I got back around midnight. I was so humiliated, so broken by what he said at the party. At first, I just wanted to go home and forget about it, but then I decided I couldn't leave it like that. I deserved an explanation. 2 years of loyal service and he treats me like trash." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "When I walked into the conference room, Isaac was still there, drinking whiskey straight from the bottle. He wasn't even surprised to see me. It was as if he was expecting me. I told him I was quitting, that I couldn't take this treatment anymore. He laughed and said no one else would hire me, that he would make sure of it. Savannah fell silent, her hands shaking slightly. Frost waited patiently for her to continue. We started arguing. He said horrible things, and I wasn't holding back either. At one point, he took a gun out of his desk drawer and put it in front of him. He didn't threaten me, he just showed me he could. Then his phone rang, and he went out into the hallway to answer it. I took advantage of the moment and just left. I swear, when I left the building, he was alive. Frost made a note in his notebook, then looked up. Your fingerprints are on the gun, Savannah. How do you explain that? She covered her face with her hands. I touched it. When Isaac left, I took the gun. I thought I'd take it so he couldn't hurt himself or me, but then I just put it back and left. I've never fired a gun, Detective. Never in my life. What about the blood on your clothes? I don't know, Savannah whispered. Maybe I touched something when I left. I was in such a state I could hardly think straight. Frost looked at her with a long, searching gaze. Her version was possible, but unlikely. All the evidence pointed to her. Savannah, tell me about your relationship with Mr. Blackwell. How long ago did the problem start? She leaned back in her chair, wiping away tears. About a year ago, when I started to openly express my gender identity. Before that, everything was fine. Isaac treated me almost like a protege, saying he saw potential in me, that one day I could be a lawyer at his firm. I worked hard and studied at night. He even paid for part of my education. What changed? When I told him I was a trans woman, he pretended to support me at first. But soon, everything changed. He started making snide remarks, using the wrong pronouns, deliberately calling me by my old name in front of clients. Then we lost our first big client, a company that openly stated that it didn't want to do business with a firm that employed someone like that. After that, Isaac got even worse. He blamed me for everything and said that I was destroying his business with my selfishness. Frost wrote down every word, mentally piecing together a picture of what had happened. Do you have any evidence of this treatment? I recorded some of the conversations on my phone. Not all of them, of course, but enough to show what he was like. The phone should be among my things. Frost nodded and made a note to check Savannah's phone. At that moment, an officer looked into the room. Detective, the captain wants to see you. We'll continue later, Frost said, turning off the recorder. Think about it again, Savannah. If there's something you're not telling us, now is the time to say it. Leaving her under the supervision of another officer, Frost headed for Captain Rodriguez's office. A stocky man with a military bearing met him at the door. Frost, you've got a big case. The mayor called and the press is already at the station. Blackwell was an influential man. I'm aware, Captain. I'm on it. What do you have? Frost briefly summarized the situation, showing the notes he had taken. All the evidence points to the secretary, but I want to be sure. We need to check her history of harassment and get access to Blackwell's computer. Captain Rodriguez tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. The warrant for the computer has already been obtained. Our techs are in his office right now. Be careful with this case, Frost. I don't want us to arrest the wrong person because we're in a hurry. But we can't drag our feet either. If it's her, the public will want justice. Understood, Captain. I'll check everything thoroughly. Leaving the office, Frost headed to the technical department, where Blackwell's computer, delivered from his office, was already being examined. A digital forensics specialist, a young woman with short red hair, greeted him with obvious excitement. Detective, you have to see this, she said, pointing to the screen. We found a hidden folder with files about Savannah Wright. There are hundreds of documents, photos taken with a hidden camera, recordings of conversations, personal notes. It's quite unpleasant. Frost leaned over the monitor, looking through the contents of the folder. Photos of Savannah in various situations, at her desk, in a cafe, even entering her home. Recordings of conversations, carefully dated and cataloged. But the most interesting were Blackwell's personal notes, something between a diary and obsessive musings. Saw Savannah talking to Harrison, the client again. She's getting too confident, too feminine, Harrison doesn't even realize she's not a real woman. What if he finds out? What will he think of me, of the firm? I have to put her in her place. And further on, in a later entry, lost the contract with Midwest Insurance. It's all because of her. They found out, they'll find out sooner or later. Her presence undermines everything I've built. But I can't just fire her. She'll go to court and accuse me of discrimination. I have to make her leave on her own. Frost continued reading, immersing himself in a dark world of obsession and fear. Some of the entries had strange, almost confessional undertones. Today I saw some old photos from college, a Halloween party where I wore a dress. Everyone laughed and said it suited me. When my father saw the pictures, he beat me so badly I couldn't get out of bed for a week. No feminine antics in this family. I burned all the photos, but I remember how I felt in that dress. Free. And then, just a week before the murder, she's a constant reminder of what I could never have, of the courage I never had. I hate her for it. I hate myself for it. We're losing clients. The firm is in danger, and I can't stop thinking about what might have been if I hadn't broken under my father's pressure. If I had been as brave as she was? Frost tore himself away from the monitor, feeling a heaviness in his chest. The story was turning out to be much more complicated than it had initially seemed. "Make copies of all this," he ordered, "and check if there's anything else related to Savannah or Blackwell's personal problems." Leaving the technical department, Frost headed for Blackwell's office. He needed to see the place where most of the harassment had taken place and talk to other employees of the firm. Perhaps someone else could confirm Savannah's words. The Blackwell and Partners office occupied 2 floors of a business center and was impressive in its design: marble, glass, and expensive dark wood furniture. The reception area, where Savannah usually sat, was located directly in front of Blackwell's office, a spacious room with panoramic windows overlooking the city. On Savannah's desk, Frost noticed a few personal items: a photograph of an elderly couple, probably her parents, a small cactus, and a pen holder with a quote, "True courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it." These small details spoke of a person trying to preserve their identity in an aggressive environment. Blackwell's office exuded power and control. A massive desk, a leather chair, walls covered with diplomas and photographs of influential people. In one of the pictures, Frost recognized the mayor of Hamden himself, shaking hands with Blackwell at some charity event. Looking around the office, the detective noticed a small camera cleverly hidden in a decorative element on the wall. It was pointed directly at Savannah's workstation in the reception area. This confirmed one of the entries in the surveillance diary. A tall man in his 40s appeared in the doorway with a tired face and attentive eyes. "Detective Frost? Ellis Ramsey, partner," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "I was called here because you wanted to talk to me." "Yes, Mr. Ramsey. Could we talk in your office?" Ramsey's office was smaller than Blackwell's, but just as elegantly furnished. Frost noticed several family photos on the desk: a wife and 2 teenage children. "A terrible tragedy," Ramsey began, offering the detective a seat. "Isaac was a complicated man, but no one deserves to die like that." "How long did you work together?" 15 years. We founded this firm together, although most of the initial investment was his. Isaac was always ambitious, tough, but an effective leader, at least until recently." "What changed?" Ramsey paused, searching for the right words. "He became more unstable, irritable, especially after Savannah started her transition. It really affected him, though I never understood why." Frost decided to see how candid Ramsey would be. "We found Blackwell's personal notes. He mentions events from college involving his father and some experiments with gender expression." Ramsey flinched, then nodded slowly. "So, yes, there was an incident. We met in college. We were roommates. Isaac was different back then, more open, curious. At a party, he wore women's clothes and he liked it. He continued to experiment for a while, even thought about exploring that side of himself more deeply." "What happened?" "His father, Judge Blackwell, found out. He was known for his conservative views, iron discipline, and cruel temper. Isaac never went into details, but after his father's visit, he changed. He became tougher, colder, and began to fiercely pursue his career, proving something, to his father or to himself. He never mentioned those experiments again and even got angry if anyone brought up his college years. Frost took notes, piecing together a psychological profile of the victim. And when did Savannah come into the picture? 2 years ago. At the time, she was still going by her male name. Isaac saw great potential in her and even paid for part of her law school education. They were very close, almost like mentor and protege. But when Savannah began her transition, Isaac saw it as a betrayal. Ramsey hesitated. I think he saw in her what he could have been if he had had the courage, and that tormented him. Did you try to intervene when the bullying started? Ramsey lowered his head, clearly ashamed. Not enough. I made comments, tried to talk to him alone, but he was a senior partner with a controlling stake. In the end, I was afraid for my position, for my children's future. It's no excuse, but he shrugged with a bitter smile. Do you believe Savannah could have killed him? Ramsey thought for a moment. I don't know. The way he treated her in recent months could have driven her to despair, especially at the company party. That was just cruel. But Savannah always seemed so reserved. Even when he was unbearable, she maintained her dignity. If she did do it, something truly extraordinary must have happened. Thanking Ramsey for his candor, Frost left his office with even more questions than he had before the conversation. The story was becoming more complicated, with each new layer revealing deeper motives and conflicts. Returning to the station, Frost found Taylor Pierce waiting for him. She was nervously fiddling with the strap of her designer bag as she sat in the waiting area. Miss Pierce? You wanted to see me? Yes, Detective, she said, standing up to meet him. I have something that might be important to the case, a recording from the corporate event. They went into the interrogation room where Taylor took out her phone and opened a video file. I didn't plan on filming, but when Isaac started that awful monologue, I felt like I had to record it. It's unpleasant to watch. She handed the phone to Frost, and he pressed play. The video had been filmed surreptitiously, at a slight angle, but the quality was good. Blackwell, clearly intoxicated, with a glass in his hand, was addressing a group of employees. Among them stood Savannah, her face frozen and tense. And you know what's funny? He thinks he can be a woman. Look at him, at that dress, that awkward gait. That's not a woman, it's a parody. The camera shook slightly, but continued to film as Blackwell approached Savannah. You're destroying my firm with your existence. Clients are leaving, our reputation is suffering. And for what? For your sick fantasy. You'll never be a woman no matter what you do to your body. Savannah stood motionless, but tears streamed down her cheeks. One of the employees tried to intervene, but Blackwell roughly pushed him away. Don't defend him. You're all losing your jobs because of this freak. Maybe I should fire him right now, right here, in front of everyone? At that moment, Savannah turned around and quickly walked toward the exit. Blackwell shouted insults after her, which became increasingly rude and personal. The video ended just as the door closed behind Savannah. Frost turned off the recording, feeling a heaviness in his chest. Even with his experience dealing with the most serious crimes, seeing such open cruelty was unpleasant. Did it continue after she left? He asked Taylor. No, it all died down somehow. Many people left and it became awkward. Isaac continued drinking and became gloomy. I left around 1 in the morning and he was still there. Did you see Savannah come back? No, but I heard from the security guard that she came back later. I immediately thought she had come back to get her things. No one would have stayed to work after that. Frost nodded, making notes. Thanks for this recording, Miss Pierce. It will be added to the case file. After Taylor left, the detective returned to questioning Savannah. She looked even more exhausted than she had in the morning, but there was something new in her eyes. Determination, or perhaps resignation to the inevitable. Savannah, we found Blackwell's notes about you, as well as the video from the company party, Frost said, sitting down across from her. We also spoke with Mr. Ramsey, who confirmed the story about the bullying. All of this will help your case if you tell us the truth about what happened that night. Savannah was silent for a long time, then looked up at the detective. What else was in his notes? She asked quietly. His personal issues with gender identity, his fears, how he saw you as a reflection of what he could have become. A shadow of understanding crossed her face. I always felt like it was something personal, deep. His hatred was too passionate to be simple intolerance. Frost leaned forward. Savannah, we have your fingerprints on the gun, your blood on the clothes, witnesses who saw you return to the building. If you acted in the heat of the moment after months of harassment, that could mitigate the charge, but you have to tell the truth. Savannah closed her eyes, and her shoulders slumped, as if she had finally surrendered to the weight of the circumstances. What she was about to say would change her life forever, and they both knew it. The silence in the interrogation room weighed heavily on their shoulders. Savannah Wright looked up at Detective Hayden Frost, her eyes showing the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. "I killed him," she finally said, and those 3 words seemed to release the tension that had built up in the air. "I didn't plan it. I didn't even think I was capable of doing something like that." Frost turned on the tape recorder, officially recording the beginning of her confession, and nodded silently, inviting her to continue. "After the party, I was devastated," Savannah said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I took a taxi home. The driver even asked if I was okay. I was crying so hard. At home, I tried to calm down, took a shower, drank some tea, but the humiliation, shame, and anger were all boiling inside me." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I started to remember not only that night, but all the previous months, how he had gradually turned my life into hell, how his voice changed when he spoke to me in front of others, using the wrong pronouns, how he made me work overtime without pay, how he left magazines about mental illness on my desk, open to articles about gender dysphoria." Savannah took a sip of water from the plastic cup Frost handed her. "At some point, I realized I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't let him win, break me without consequences. I deserved at least the chance to say everything that had been building up, to tell him he couldn't destroy me, that I was stronger than his hatred." "So you went back to the office?" Frost asked, taking notes. "Yes. I knew he was probably still there. Isaac often stayed after company parties. He said he liked the quiet of the empty office. When I arrived, the building was almost dark, with only the lights in the conference room on. He was sitting there alone, drinking whiskey straight from the bottle and looking through some files on his laptop." Savannah sighed deeply, and her voice grew quieter. "When I walked in, he didn't even look surprised. It was as if he was waiting for me." He smirked and said, "Back for your paycheck?" deliberately using the masculine form. I replied that I'd come to tell him I was quitting, but that I wouldn't let him ruin my reputation in legal circles. He laughed and said that no one would believe a mentally ill man in a dress against the word of a respected lawyer. Savannah's eyes filled with tears, but she continued, as if trying to let out everything she had been holding inside. We started arguing. I reminded him how he had supported me before, how he had said he saw potential in me. I asked him what had changed, and then he broke down. He started yelling that I had betrayed him, that he had invested in me, and I had repaid him by making him a laughingstock and putting his firm and his reputation in jeopardy. Frost listened attentively, not interrupting, allowing Savannah to speak at her own pace. At some point, he got personal. He said he always saw himself in me, ambitious, smart, that he had high hopes for me, and I ruined everything with my selfish decision to pretend to be a woman. Then I told him I knew about his past, about his own experiments in college. "How did you find out?" Frost asked, raising an eyebrow in surprise. Ellis Ramsey let it slip once after a company party when he was tipsy. He said that Isaac wasn't always like that he also had moments of self-exploration. I never used that information against Isaac, but that night, I was so angry. Savannah lowered her head, as if ashamed of her next words. When I mentioned it, his face changed. First he turned pale, then red with rage. He started yelling that I didn't know anything, that it was just a stupid joke, that he never... She faltered. And then he suddenly fell silent and smiled strangely. He said, "You think you understand me? That we're alike? The difference is that I was able to suppress that weakness, and you gave in to it. I'm strong, and you're a pathetic imitator." Pain flashed in Savannah's eyes at the memory. Then he opened his desk drawer and took out a gun. He didn't point it at me, just put it in front of him and said he had ways of solving problems, that his father had taught him to be a man and deal with uncomfortable situations. He started coming toward me, speaking in an increasingly threatening tone. He said that if I dared to tell anyone about our conversation, I would regret it. That he had connections everywhere, from the police to the courts, and no one would believe a crazy transvestite. Savannah took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. I started backing away toward the door, but he blocked my way. His face contorted, he looked possessed. He said I was the embodiment of everything he hated about himself, everything he should have destroyed years ago. Then he grabbed me by the shoulders and pushed me against the wall. I hit my head and lost my bearings for a moment. He kept shouting something. His face was very close. I could smell alcohol. When he swung at me, I pushed him away and rushed to the table. I grabbed the gun and pointed it at him just to stop him, to make him back off. I had never held a gun before, didn't even know if it was loaded. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her voice remained surprisingly steady. Isaac laughed. He said I didn't even know how to take the gun off the safety. He was right, I didn't know. But when he moved toward me again, I started to back away and accidentally hit a lever on the gun. Isaac noticed. His eyes widened, but he kept coming, saying I'd never dare to shoot, that I didn't have the courage. When he was really close and reached for my throat again, I closed my eyes and pulled the trigger. Savannah fell silent, lost in memories of that night. The interrogation room was completely silent, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights. The sound was deafening, she finally continued. I didn't even realize what had happened at first. I opened my eyes and saw Isaac on the floor. Blood was spreading across his shirt. He looked at me with such surprise, as if he couldn't believe I had really done it. Then his eyes glazed over, and I knew he was dead. "What did you do then?" Frost asked, trying to maintain a professional tone, although the story clearly affected him. I panicked. I dropped the gun and ran out of the building. I drove home, not knowing what to do next. I thought about fleeing the city, the country, but where would I go? And I didn't plan to kill him. It was self-defense. I just wanted him to back off. Frost turned off the recorder and stared at Savannah for a few seconds. Then he took a handkerchief out of his pocket and handed it to her. "I'll call a lawyer for you," he said. "Your story matches the evidence and what we've learned about Blackwell's character. The documented evidence of harassment, his personal records, the testimony of his colleagues. All of that will be taken into account when the case is reviewed." Savannah wiped away her tears and nodded. "I know I committed a crime. I know I have to answer for it. But I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted to live my life, to be myself, without fear and humiliation." After her confession was officially recorded, Savannah was transferred to a holding cell. Frost made sure she was provided with everything she needed, including access to medical services to continue her hormone therapy. Returning to his desk, the detective began to compile his final report on the case. The facts were coming together. Months of systematic harassment, psychological pressure, Blackwell's personal obsession, his own internal conflicts projected onto Savannah, and finally, the physical threat that was the last straw. Late in the evening, when most of the station staff had already left, Captain Rodriguez approached Frost's desk. "How's it going, Frost?" "I've finished the report, Captain. The case is pretty clear-cut. Murder in the heat of passion after prolonged psychological abuse and direct physical threats. We have documentary evidence of harassment, witness statements, the victim's personal records confirming the motive, and a full confession from the suspect." Rodriguez rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "The press has already started covering this case. Some sources are trying to portray Blackwell as a victim of transphobia. His father, a retired judge, has already made a statement demanding the maximum punishment." Frost shook his head. "All the evidence is on Savannah's side. She committed a crime, but there are clearly mitigating circumstances. Any impartial court would recognize that." "I'd like to believe that," sighed the captain. "In any case, good work, Frost. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll have to deal with the prosecutors and the press." Left alone, Frost looked through the case files again. Among them was the photograph from Savannah's office, her and Blackwell in front of the office building on the day she was hired. Their smiling faces reminded him of how things could have been different if Blackwell had found the strength to accept not only Savannah, but himself. 3 months later, On a cool autumn day, Savannah Wright sat in the New Haven County courtroom, waiting for the jury's verdict. The trial had turned out to be more complicated than initially expected. Blackwell's father, a former federal judge, used all his connections to portray his son as a victim and Savannah as a cold-blooded killer. However, the evidence Frost had gathered was irrefutable. Blackwell's personal records, corporate videos, testimony from colleagues about systematic bullying, and medical examiner reports confirming bruises on Savannah's shoulders and back all pointed to self-defense and a state of emotional distress. Savannah's lawyer, the experienced Janet Caldwell, who specialized in discrimination cases, skillfully built a defense. She did not deny the fact of the murder, but focused the jury's attention on the context: years of psychological terror, culminating in a direct physical threat. Frost sat in the back rows of the courtroom, watching the proceedings. As the lead detective on the case, he had already testified a week ago, presenting all the evidence that had been gathered. Now, like everyone else, he waited for the decision of the 12 jurors who had retired to deliberate 3 hours earlier. Savannah looked exhausted, but held herself with dignity. She had lost weight during her months in pretrial detention, her features sharpened, but her eyes were still determined. Whatever the verdict, she was ready to accept it. Finally, the jury room door opened, and they returned to the courtroom. The forewoman, an elderly woman with gray hair and alert eyes, handed the judge a sheet of paper with the verdict. The judge read it, his expression impassive, then returned the paper. "Please read the verdict," he said to the forewoman. The woman stood up, straightened her shoulders, and said in a clear voice, "On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant not guilty." A whisper ran through the courtroom. Savannah closed her eyes, her shoulders trembling slightly. "On the charge of second-degree murder, we find the defendant not guilty." The whispering grew louder. Blackwell's father, sitting in the front row, clenched his fists. "On the charge of manslaughter, we find the defendant guilty. However, we recommend that the court show maximum leniency in sentencing, considering all the circumstances of the case." Savannah opened her eyes and looked at her lawyer, who squeezed her hand in relief. It was the best possible outcome. Instead of life imprisonment or decades in prison, she could get a minimum sentence, possibly even probation. The judge announced that the sentence would be handed down in a week and adjourned the court. As Savannah was led out of the courtroom, she caught Frost's eye and nodded slightly, a gesture of gratitude for his honest investigation and for not allowing prejudice and pressure to influence the search for the truth. Leaving the courthouse, Frost paused on the steps, breathing in the fresh autumn air. The case had affected him deeply, making him think about the invisible scars people carry inside, about how self-rejection can turn into hatred for others, about the fragile line between victim and perpetrator. In a world full of shades of gray, the truth is rarely simple. Sometimes tragedy is not the result of pure evil or madness, but the culmination of a long series of pain, fear, and denial. Savannah will pay for her crime, but the system recognized the circumstances that led to it, a small victory for justice in an imperfect world. As he got into his car, Frost took one last look at the courthouse where people's fates had been decided, and thought about how many more stories like this were hidden behind the facades of prosperous offices, respectable homes, and successful careers. Stories of people who wear masks, hiding their true selves until the pressure becomes unbearable and leads to tragic consequences.